In our headlines on this Monday, November 24th, here in South Korea, President Lee Jae-myung and his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan are sitting down for their bilateral summit in Turkey today for talks to advance bilateral ties. And the first Group of 20 summit in Africa adopts a leaders' declaration on the first day of the multilateral meeting, despite the US's earlier unilateral advice against such a declaration as it boycotts the event. Meanwhile, satellite imagery reportedly shows North Korea's Yongbyon nuclear complex has been modernized and expanded amid the regime's relentless commitment to its nuclear weapons program. President Lee Jae-myung is in Turkey and scheduled to sit down with his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan later on this Monday. Our presidential office correspondent Song Yoo-jin starts us off.
The last stop of President Lee Jae-myung's 10-day four-nation trip is Turkey, widely known in South Korea as a brother country bound by blood for its military contribution during the Korean War. Marking 75 years since the start of the war, President Lee is making a two-day state visit to Ankara starting Monday.
Turkey was one of the top 4 troop-contributing nations during the Korean War and is a strategic partner.
After arriving in Ankara on Monday afternoon, the president will first visit Anıtkabir, where Turkey's founder and first president, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, is laid to rest. He will then hold his first summit with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, where discussions are expected to focus on bolstering Seoul and Ankara's strategic partnership.
President Lee's state visit to Turkey is expected to deepen bilateral cooperation in areas including defense, nuclear energy, and biotechnology.
In a written interview with Turkey's state-run Anadolu news agency published on Sunday, President Lee expressed confidence that Seoul and Ankara can expand their defense partnership into next-generation technologies. One possibility, he said, is integrating Turkey's world-leading unmanned systems with South Korea's advanced conventional platforms such as tanks, artillery, and naval vessels. The two countries already have experience working together. Turkey's first mass-produced Altay main battle tank is equipped with a Korean engine. In the nuclear sector, talks are underway for Korean companies to participate in Turkey's Sinop nuclear power plant project, which will become the country's second nuclear power plant. Following the summit, a state dinner will be held. President Lee will wrap up his visit on Tuesday by paying tribute at a memorial honoring Turkish soldiers who lost their lives in the Korean War and meeting with members of the Korean community in Turkey. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
And while we await the talks between the leaders of the two countries, Turkey's top diplomat to South Korea believes Seoul and Ankara have a shared history that can be leveraged to launch fresh partnerships in nuclear energy and more. Our foreign affairs correspondent Oh Soo-young sat down with him.
South Korea and Turkey's centuries-old brotherhood is now powering major partnerships in future industries as President Lee Jae-myung begins his visit to Ankara. Turkey's ambassador to South Korea, Murat Tamer, says the visit marks a turning point, grounded in a relationship deeper than most bilateral ties.
Because it will be a first visit of the Korean president, I believe, after 16 or some years. And Turkey and Korea, as you know, we consider each other as a blood brothers. And we have many things in common. We have share a joint past, history. And there's many things we can do together, like two like-minded countries and the two ends of this continent of Asia.
The ambassador says with the meeting of the two leaders, he hopes to see concrete advances in energy, defense and economic cooperation.
Based on the Korea-Turkey FTA, our bilateral trade has now reached $11 billion. And how do you hope to see economic cooperation go forward?
I have to tell you that our economics are not alternative to each other. Turkey and Korea, our economies are complementary to each other. So we can work together in many fields. One of them is the nuclear project, that it will be what I always say, that it will be the jewel of the crown of Turkish-Korean relations. Because one Korean minister told me that nuclear project is a friendship for 100 years. Well, we've been friends for Korea for 1,500 years. No reason to add 100 years more. Why not? It will be cooperation for many fields, from the construction sector to the chemicals to the services. It will just open up many business opportunities on win-win basis for both of our countries.
Ankara is positioning itself as a strategic gateway for Korean firms seeking access to other large markets.
First of all, Turkey is in the position of its proximity. It's very near to Balkans, Europe, Gulf countries, Central Asia. For example, about 4 or 5 hours flight, you can reach just about 800 million people within the reach. So it's a very good hub for the Korean companies. Secondly, Turkey and the European Union, we have a customs union agreement. So anything produces in Turkey can be sent to Europe without any custom duties.
Defence cooperation is also expanding. Ankara is producing the Turkish version of Korea's K9 Thunder howitzer and developing its own main battle tank using components derived from the K2 platform. The ambassador says the next step is drones, an area where Turkey is now a global leader.
Turkey has the 65% of the world drone market now. So we like our Korean brothers to have that capability. Of course, when you think about drone, you always think about the military means, but drones are also used for the civilians, for the forest fires, for the search and rescue operations.
Collaboration comes naturally to the two brother nations, which he said can create marvels.
As you mentioned, Korea and Turkey sit on the opposite ends of Eurasia. But during your 3 years here, how have you been bringing these strategic interests together?
First of all, what Korea taught me is distance is not that important as long as you have the same feeling, same heart. And when I come to Korea, I didn't realize that how the Korean people feel about Turkey. And I devoted myself to further deepen increasing our already existing bilateral relations in the field of economics, in the field of culture, in the field of political relations and commerce as well. Yes, we had some challenges, but we did a lot also in this 3 years period.
The two countries share a rare sense of togetherness, also reflected in their cooperation through MICTA, the five-nation middle power grouping of Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey and Australia. But shared values and solidarity between Korea and Turkey date back centuries.
People think that Turkish-Korean relations start in 1950s in Korean War. Well, actually, it's not the whole truth. Our relations started about 1,500 years ago when we lived side by side in the near Mongolia and China. So when Turkish soldiers came to Korea in 1950s, they did not come to the total different land or the different people. They just come to aid to their friends they know 1,500 years ago.
With high expectations for President Yi's visit, Tamer says he hopes to see both sides further building on one of Eurasia's oldest and most enduring friendships. Seoul, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, at this year's Group of 20 summit in South Africa over the weekend, President Lee Jae-myung unveiled his plan for the advancement of artificial intelligence into the African continent and his hopes of strengthening global supply chains for critical minerals. Arirang's Yoon Jung-min files this report from Johannesburg.
Critical minerals and AI were the overarching themes during the third and final session of the G20 summit in South Africa. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung was among the world leaders to share his visions with the theme of a fair and just future for all, starting off by welcoming the G20's announcement of the AI for Africa initiative.
특히 금년 APEC 의장국으로서 이런 정신을 반영한 APEC AI 이니셔티브가 아태 지역을 넘어 전 세계로 확산될 수 있도록 노력하겠습니다.
With the world facing increasing uncertainties over critical minerals amid the U.S.-China rivalry, President Lee also called for the need to establish a stable supply chain. He noted this year's G20 Critical Minerals Framework and South Korea's role as the chair of the Minerals Security Partnership.
앞으로도 고해적인 공급망 구축을 위한 국제적 노력을 계속 해 나갈 것입니다.
He went on to say that those efforts should be translated into benefiting all, particularly young people and women, as he noted Korea's contribution when it comes to building AI digital learning centers for the vulnerable. This year's G20 summit was unusual in more than one way. It was the first to be held in Africa, and the group of 20 leaders adopted a declaration on the first day of the summit, not the last, stressing the importance of multilateralism. Some of the world leaders were absent, including U.S. President Donald Trump. With this, the first round of the G20 rotating presidency was completed. South Korea will take over the rotating presidency in 2028.
막중한 책임감으로 G20가 국제 경제 협력을 위한 최상위 포럼으로 그 위상을 더욱 공고히 할 수 있도록 주어진 역할을 충실하게 이행하겠습니다.
President Lee now heads to Turkey, the final leg of his four-nation trip to the Middle East and Africa, for a summit with his Turkish counterpart. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, Johannesburg.
Also in Johannesburg, President Lee Jae-myung pledged to facilitate voting for South Korean nationals living in South Africa. At a luncheon with some 70 South Korean residents this past Sunday, the president made note of the fact that some residents had to travel as far as 1,400 kilometers to cast their ballots, given the absence of nearby polling stations. Accordingly, he proposed the introduction of an electronic voting system for overseas Koreans. This particular meeting between the South Korean president and the Korean community in South Africa was the first of its kind since the two countries established diplomatic relations back in 1992. North Korea has reportedly been modernizing and expanding its key nuclear research facility. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung has details.
North Korea has continued to modernize and expand its key nuclear complex, the Yongbyon Nuclear Scientific Research Center, a critical facility for the North's nuclear weapons program, being the sole source of plutonium and a major supplier of enriched uranium. According to 38 North, a U.S.-based website specializing in North Korea on Sunday local time, commercial satellite imagery of the complex from October and November showed that extensive expansion and maintenance work on key facilities was actively underway. What's more noticeable is a new suspected enrichment facility northeast of the radiochemical laboratory. Since September, what 38 North believes to be 6 heat exchangers, which cool centrifuges and maintain controlled temperatures inside the main building, have been installed along its southeast side. The installation and inspection of key equipment to produce nuclear material appear to be underway, hinting that the facility will soon be operational. The regime is also expanding its nuclear waste processing capacity, continuing to construct a semi-buried radioactive waste storage facility near an existing waste site. The satellite images also show continued operation of the 5-megawatt reactor there and trial runs in a pre-operational phase of an experimental light water reactor. This comes after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un emphasized the need for completing a plan to produce weapons-grade nuclear material, and in January called 2025 a crucial year for bolstering the country's nuclear forces. Though it is always hard to predict, the regime's leader could eye the 9th Party Congress to be a perfect timing to show off the North's nuclear forces.
During the military parade in October, they showed a model of a multiple warhead ICBM, so if North Korea pushes ahead with a 7th nuclear test and says it tested a small nuclear warhead for that kind of missile, the impact would be huge.
With North Korea's ties with China recovering and the U.S. seeking talks with the regime, the expert added that it would be difficult for the two countries to criticize Pyongyang even if the regime carries out a nuclear test. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Also, on the international front, China is taking its feud with Japan beyond its national borders and onto multilateral diplomatic platforms, including the UN and the G20. Our Pyongyang explains.
On Friday at the UN, China's ambassador sent a formal letter to Secretary General Antonio Guterres, accusing Prime Minister Takaichi of openly challenging China's sovereignty. That same day, at the International Atomic Energy Agency, Beijing warned that Japan was revisiting its non-nuclear principles. And at a Security Council reform debate several days earlier, China argued that Japan was unfit for permanent membership. China's diplomatic pressure is also extending to the G20 summit in South Africa, where the Japanese and Chinese premiers stood only a few seats apart during the group photo but did not acknowledge each other. Beijing had already signaled it would not agree to a bilateral meeting unless Takaichi retracted her remarks on Taiwan. At the same time, China is working to rally international support, stressing South Africa's backing during Chinese Premier Li Qiang's bilateral talks, and securing statements opposing Taiwanese independence during China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi's Central Asia tour. In an interview afterward, Wang accused Japan of crossing a red line, warning that if Tokyo continues down the wrong path, the world has the right to oppose any resurgence of militarism. Beijing has paired its diplomatic offensive with economic pressure in recent days, including travel and study advisories, halting Japanese film screenings, and resuspending Japanese seafood imports. Meanwhile, Japan is reinforcing its defense posture along its southwestern islands, with the defense minister visiting key bases this week, including those closest to Taiwan. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, peace talks between the U.S. and Ukraine in Geneva this past weekend has been hailed as substantial by the American delegation and productive by the Ukrainian delegation. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
The United States says it has made significant progress toward crafting a plan to end the war in Ukraine, following high-level talks in Geneva on Sunday. Washington says momentum is building, even as several sensitive issues remain unresolved. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio led the American delegation in negotiations with senior Ukrainian officials as both sides work to refine a peace proposal first outlined by President Donald Trump. The talks took place amid concerns in Kyiv and across Europe about parts of the U.S.-backed draft, which some allies view as offering major concessions to Russia. Rubio said negotiators had narrowed down outstanding issues within a 28-point draft plan, calling the progress substantial.
We arrived here today with one goal, and the goal was to take, is 28 points or 26 points, depending on which version as it continued to evolve, and try to narrow the ones that were open items. And we have achieved that today in a very substantial way. Now,
he said technical experts from both sides are now working to finalize remaining provisions and that the document could form the basis for a final settlement. Rubio acknowledged, however, that critical questions still need agreement, including the future roles of NATO and the European Union and how to ensure lasting security guarantees for Ukraine. He stressed that none of these issues are impossible to resolve and voiced confidence that the gap between the sides can be closed. Washington hopes a breakthrough can be reached soon. Rubio said the Trump administration aims to finalize an agreement by Thursday. Ukraine gave a similar assessment. Presidential Chief of Staff Andriy Yermak called the first meeting with the American delegation highly productive, saying both sides are working toward a fair and lasting peace. He added that Kyiv will coordinate with European partners in the days ahead and emphasized that the ultimate decision will rest with both presidents. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said it is positive that Ukraine is engaged in direct dialogue with the U.S. delegation and that there are signs the Trump team is listening.
It is important that we do talk to the Americans, and we are getting signals that President Trump's team is hearing us.
With talks set to continue, Zelensky said Monday will be a busy day as Ukraine continues to defend its interests. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Back on the local front, fewer people in their 30s are homeowners here in Seoul than ever before. Our correspondent Moon Ji-young covers the latest findings.
More young adults in Seoul are being pushed out of the housing market than ever before. The number of Seoul residents in their 30s who own their own homes dropped to a record low in 2024, according to the Ministry of Data and Statistics. Conversely, the number of residents in their 30s who did not own a home reached a record 527,000 last year, the highest figure since tracking began in 2015. That's an increase of more than 17,000 from the previous year, and the biggest annual jump on record. Non-homeowners had briefly declined in the late 2010s, but the number has now risen for 6 years in a row. Meanwhile, the number of 30-somethings who actually own homes continues to shrink. Last year, about 183,000 people in their 30s owned a home in Seoul, down nearly 8,000 from a year earlier, and the lowest level ever recorded. This leaves non-homeowners outnumbering homeowners by nearly 3-to-1, the widest gap to date. In percentage terms, only about 25% of Seoul residents in their 30s owned a home last year, down from more than 33% less than a decade ago. The nationwide rate also hit a record low, but Seoul's remains more than 10 percentage points lower than the national average. According to the ministry, delayed marriages, the rise of single-person households, and limited affordable housing are key reasons behind the decline. Experts say the biggest barrier is soaring real estate prices, which have surged far faster than wages. Stricter lending rules, including tighter mortgage limits introduced recently, have also made it even harder for young buyers to enter the market. Many now say that without substantial savings, buying a home in Seoul feels increasingly out of reach. As affordability continues to erode, there's growing concern that the divide between homeowners and non-homeowners in Seoul may widen even further in the years ahead. 문지영, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. In the United States, New York City Mayor-elect Zoran Mamdani reaffirmed that he still believes President Donald Trump is a fascist, just 2 days after a surprisingly cordial meeting at the White House. In an interview aired on NBC News on Sunday, Mamdani said, quote, "Everything I have said in the past I continue to believe," adding that he would not shy away from political disagreements. The comment came even though both men had pledged to cooperate on housing and cost of living issues during their meeting last week. Trump, who previously called Mamdani a communist lunatic, said he didn't mind the label and emphasized that he wants New York to do very well. Senior White House officials also said the administration plans to work with Mamdani despite clear policy differences. In Lebanon, Hezbollah has confirmed that its top military commander, Haitham Ali Tabtabai, was killed in a high-impact strike on Beirut by Israel on Sunday in its first attack on the Lebanese capital in months. Hezbollah said Israel's killing of its chief of staff had crossed a red line. According to Lebanon's health ministry, at least 5 people were killed and 28 wounded after the strike hit an apartment building in Beirut's densely populated Dahieh district. Israel says the operation targeted a senior figure rebuilding the group's military capabilities. The strike comes despite a ceasefire brokered by the U.S. and France in November of last year. In Nigeria, 50 of the 315 students kidnapped from St. Mary's School in Niger State on Friday have escaped and have been reunited with their families. However, a military-led search and rescue operation is continuing for the remaining 265 students and 12 teachers taken when gunmen stormed the school. The latest abduction case prompted Niger State to close all schools in the area. A similar kidnapping in Kebbi State last Monday has raised fears of targeted school hunting by armed groups. Nigeria has been dealing with a kidnapping crisis since 2014, with more than 2,500 students taken. In the United States, the new film Wicked for Good delivered a record-breaking opening on the weekend, earning $150 million domestically and $226 million worldwide. The sequel far outpaced the first Wicked film, which opened with $114 million last year and became the second highest domestic opener of 2025, behind a Minecraft movie. Industry analysts say the performance sets a new record for fantasy adventure sequels and signals a strong rebound for the U.S. box office after a slow October. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
The skies continue to be overcast today due to clouds and dust in the air. The concentration of ultrafine dust in the Gyeongsang-do provinces will rise to bad levels temporarily overnight. This dusty air will ease off with rain across the country tomorrow. It will start to rain in the west at dawn and expand to the whole country in the morning, and most of it will stop in the afternoon. After it rains tomorrow, it will get cold rapidly, plummeting to 2 degrees Celsius on Wednesday morning in Seoul. You need to take good care of your health due to the sudden temperature changes. Tomorrow morning, Seoul, Daejeon, and Gwangju will start cool at 8 degrees, Busan at 11 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 11 degrees in Seoul and Gwangju, 15 degrees in Gyeongju and Jeju. As the dry weather continues around the East Coast, please take extra precautions not to cause any wildfires. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session. Thank you for now.